The courtroom was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that makes even the sound of papers shuffling echo against the marble walls. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, throwing golden rectangles across the floor where a handful of jurors, attorneys, and bystanders waited for proceedings to begin. It wasn't supposed to be an unusual day for Judge Alan Whitmore, a man nearing his late 60s, whose decades on the bench had hardened him into a man who believed he had seen it all. He had handled murder trials, billion-dollar corporate disputes, messy divorces, and everything in between. But what he didn't know was that this day would shake his confidence in ways he never expected. It began with a teenager, barely 17 by the looks of him, standing nervously at the defense table. His clothes were neat but simple, his hair trimmed, though the nervous way he shifted on his feet betrayed his youth. Judge Whitmore glanced down at the docket, muttering, "Michael Carter, juvenile hearing, theft charges." He sighed, already convinced this was just another in the long line of troubled kids who wasted their potential. Michael looked so out of place, standing there alone, no parent by his side, no attorney to represent him. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Where's your counsel, son?" Michael cleared his throat. His voice cracked a little, betraying his nerves. "Your Honor, I'll be representing myself." The courtroom erupted in small murmurs. A bailiff coughed, a woman in the back stifled a laugh. Judge Whitmore leaned back in his chair and let out a low chuckle. "Represent yourself? Son, this isn't a mock trial at your high school. You're facing actual charges here. Do you even know what that means?" Michael didn't flinch. His brown eyes locked on the judge's, steady in a way that surprised everyone. "Yes, sir. I've studied the case thoroughly. I'm prepared to defend myself." The judge shook his head, half amused, half irritated. "Study the case. Good Lord. Listen, son, this is a court of law. People train for years to even attempt what you're suggesting. You got to be out of your depth." But Michael wasn't backing down. There was something about the way he stood, shoulders squared, chin lifted, not arrogance, but determination. "With respect, Your Honor, I'd like the chance to proceed. I know my rights." That stubborn spark reminded the judge of himself, decades ago, when he was a young attorney with nothing but grit and an old suit. Against his better judgment, he allowed it. "Fine. You want to embarrass yourself? Go ahead. But don't expect me to hold your hand when you stumble." The prosecution began with confidence. The district attorney, a seasoned man named Robert Hughes, approached with a smug smile. He laid out the state's argument. Michael had been caught on surveillance near a jewelry store at the same time of the theft. He insisted the evidence was clear and irrefutable. Michael listened carefully, taking notes in a worn leather journal. His penmanship was sharp and precise, every word underlined and marked with symbols no one else could quite follow. When it was his turn, he rose slowly, adjusting his tie, a tie that looked like it had been borrowed from someone twice his size. "Mr. Hughes," Michael began, his voice steadier now, "you claim the evidence is irrefutable. But could you please explain why the surveillance video timestamp is misaligned by 7 minutes compared to the police dispatch log?" The prosecutor froze for just a second, then shuffled his papers. The judge's eyebrows lifted. That was a detail no one had caught, not even him. Hughes tried to wave it off, but Michael pressed further, pointing out inconsistencies, referencing case law like someone twice his age. He quoted from Miranda versus Arizona and in Regalt, landmark cases on juvenile rights, weaving them into his defense with astonishing fluency. The courtroom shifted from laughter to disbelief. Even the stenographer paused once, peering over her glasses to make sure she was hearing correctly. By the end of the first day, Judge Whitmore no longer found himself mocking the boy. Instead, he leaned forward, fascinated, as Michael dismantled witness testimony with surgical precision. A store clerk admitted under Michael's questioning that he wasn't entirely sure if the boy in the footage was Michael at all. A police officer grew flustered when Michael pointed out that the search of his backpack was conducted without probable cause. The judge had spent years telling young men like Michael that life would eat them alive if they didn't wise up. But here was a boy who seemed to have wised up long before his time. When court adjourned, Whitmore sat in his chambers longer than usual, staring at the old photos on his wall. Himself as a young attorney, grinning after his first big win, and his own father, a stern man who used to tell him that kids were meant to listen, not lead. For the first time in years, he felt humbled. Over the next week, Michael continued his defense. Each day, he grew bolder, more confident. He wasn't perfect. Sometimes he stumbled over words or needed to pause to gather his thoughts, but he had an uncanny ability to cut to the truth. People in the gallery began to show up just to watch him. Word spread around town. There's a teenage genius taking on the system and winning. By the closing arguments, Hughes looked rattled. His one certain case had unraveled thread by thread. Michael stood tall before the jury, speaking with a quiet passion. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not asking for sympathy. I am asking for fairness. Look at the facts, not my age, not the assumptions made about me. If justice means anything, it must mean that truth matters more than appearances. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. They returned with a verdict, not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Michael let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Judge Whitmore banged his gavel for order, but there was a softness in his voice as he spoke. Case dismissed. Mr. Carter, I owe you an apology. I doubted you, mocked you even, but you reminded this court, and me, that wisdom and courage don't always come with age or a law degree. Sometimes they come from a place deeper than that. Don't lose that fire. Michael nodded, his eyes glistening. Thank you, Your Honor. It might have ended there, just a remarkable story for the newspapers, but for Judge Whitmore, it lingered. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Michael standing there, fearless against all odds. It made him think of the countless kids he had dismissed over the years, the ones he had assumed were lost causes. Had he failed them? Had he judged them too harshly because of their youth? The next morning, instead of his usual routine, he visited the local library. He asked the librarian about Michael. What he learned left him shaken. Michael had grown up in foster care, bouncing from home to home. He had taught himself about the law by sneaking into libraries, reading old case files online, studying court transcripts. He had no mentors, no safety net, just an unyielding belief that knowledge could be his way out. For weeks afterward, Whitmore found himself reflecting differently on every case. When a young man appeared before him for vandalism, he didn't just see a criminal. He saw someone who might be another Michael, waiting for a chance to be heard. Months later, Whitmore received a letter. The handwriting was neat, careful. It was from Michael. He had been accepted to a university pre-law program on scholarship. He wrote, Your Honor, thank you for giving me the chance to prove myself. I know you didn't have to. That moment changed my life. I want to spend the rest of mine making sure others get that same chance. Whitmore held the letter for a long time, his throat tightening. In a career that had often left him cynical, this was a reminder of why he had become a judge in the first place. Not for power or prestige, but for justice. Years later, when Whitmore retired, he kept that letter framed on his desk. Visitors would ask about it, and he'd tell them the story, not just about a teenager who outsmarted a courtroom, but about the lesson he himself had learned in humility. Never underestimate someone because of their age, their clothes, their circumstances, he'd say. Greatness can come from the most unexpected places. And if you mock instead of nurturing it, you risk missing the very thing that could change the world. Michael did become an attorney, one of the youngest to pass the bar in the state's history. And when he finally stood in court as a licensed lawyer, defending kids who were just like he once was, Judge Whitmore sat quietly in the gallery, watching with pride. Life has a way of humbling even the proudest souls. For Whitmore, the day he mocked a boy and discovered a genius was the day he stopped being just a judge and started becoming a better man. For Michael, it was proof that no matter where you start, the power of resilience, knowledge, and courage can carry you anywhere. And for everyone who heard their story, it was a reminder that we must never let cynicism blind us to potential, nor let age dictate who we believe is worthy of being heard. Because sometimes, the voice that shakes the very foundations of a courtroom doesn't come from the seasoned lawyer or the gray-haired judge. Sometimes, it comes from a teenager who refuses to give up, and in doing so, teaches us all what justice really means.